listening to the Practical Astrophotography podcast, where you are an absolute beginner with a smartphone, DSLR, or a seasoned professional with one-shot color dedicated camera. You will find the tools, techniques, and advice needed to take your passion to the next level. If you're looking to improve your imaging skills, get insight from seasoned professionals, or hear stories of how others have started their astrophotography journey, you are in the right spot.
Hey, Richard, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Richard, I thought today we would just basically talk about some of your experiences. You've been doing photography for quite a while.
Yeah, originally I got into photography because my father-in-law, ex-father-in-law now, he's big into photography, and I'm not really a sports guy, and he is. So I tried to find a different level to connect with him, and he was into photography. I got into photography. Divorce happened, and they said one of the healthiest things you can do is, kind of get into some sort of hobby or something when going through divorce. And so that's what I did. I threw myself into photography, and I found a passion for it, a love for it. It's so much, like everything about photography I absolutely love. And then I got into astrophotography soon after that, when I loved astronomy as a child. And I tried to kind of mix these two hobbies of things that I loved.
So how long would you say you've been doing photography for?
Photography I've probably been doing since, I want to say 2010 approximately.
Okay.
So 12 years.
So we met at NEAF back in 2018. You were the Meade brand ambassador, and now we all know that Meade has been acquired by Orion. Do you do much with that anymore, or has Orion kind of like nixed that whole program, or what's the lowdown on that?
That's a good question, and I also have questions around that as well. So when Meade was a thing before they were acquired by Orion, I had contacts that I worked with Meade. We'd stay in relatively constant contact. They would send me different new products that they were releasing, not only so I could take photos of these products, but also so I could do tutorials and videos on them. And then also, just to help publicize and the product, the brand, all of that stuff. After they got acquired by Orion, the people that I was working with, they had moved on to different places, different companies, and we actually still stay in contact, just not through Meade specifically. If you look up the Meade brand ambassadors, I'm still on the website along with my other counterparts, but since they've been acquired by Orion, I actually haven't had any contact with Orion or with Meade. And so even though it still exists on the website, behind the scenes, there hasn't been a whole lot of activity there.
So basically you as an ambassador, you would go to different events, NEAF or other trade shows or outreach, and you would just basically talk about Meade. And probably the biggest benefit was you did get free products to actually take a look at and play with before they were released.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually remember it was a funny experience. I was sent the Coronado Solar Max 3 70 millimeter, and they were very clear. This is not to be talked about. This is not to be shared. This is still a new product, but we want to get this out to you so we can start getting that content together.
So they were tight-lipped.
Very tight-lipped. Now, the funny part comes into play because Woodland Hills, their main guy over there, Simon, who is an amazing astrophotographer. All of his sun photos are just, I feel like they're better than NASA's personally. But he actually posted some and tagged Meade and the Solar Max 3, and I immediately contacted my Meade contacts, and I'm like, so I just saw that this was posted, and so they hurried and contacted him, and then he had to take them down because they weren't ready to make the announcement yet for the new telescope. But it was a little funny because I'm like, oh, I thought I was supposed to be quiet about this, and then someone else ended up sharing a lot of information, I guess. And he probably just didn't get the memo, right? They probably sent it over to him for the same purpose. But because he wasn't in good direct contact with them, there probably wasn't that same level of communication there.
Yeah, and plus a lot of people on YouTube or Instagram, they always want to be the first person out there with the new news so they can get more likes and more accolades and get more attention. So it's always a struggle with trying to keep something hush-hush. So you've been a photographer for about 12 years. You're a Meade brand ambassador. You also are a panelist for the astronomy-focused panels at FanX, which is a Salt Lake City Comic-Con event. So you go to those and you just talk everything astronomy, or what exactly is that all about?
Absolutely. Yeah. We are lucky enough to have in the Utah Valley Astronomy Club, Mr. John Lindwall. He's got like almost every PhD doctorate sort of thing that you can imagine. And he actually approached them, and they had us come, and there was standing room only one year. Like, it was the first year, standing room only in one of their larger rooms. And they loved it. They loved the idea of us, coming, talking about astronomy related things. Because a lot of people at FanX, they're writing books, they're creating video games. They like to get some of this real world information into astronomy, along with it helps them write their books or their storylines for their video games. But it kind of helps blur the difference between reality and fiction. And when we're there, obviously it's a little bit of a, hey, look at us, come join our group. But it's also, we're just trying to do exactly what most astronomy people are trying to do, to outreach, try to get more people interested in space, trying to help people understand the importance of dark skies and things like that.
That's some really great stuff. And, that's kind of stuff that I'm interested in too, is outreach and people interested in particular, like you mentioned, dark skies. Are you sharing actual data? Are you sharing some ways that you alter some photographs, or what kind of stuff are you working with when you're sharing with them?
Good question. So it obviously depends on what we're talking about. So a couple times in the past, we talked about Oumuamua, the interstellar body that passed through our solar system a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. And we, each person on the panel, we all talk about a different aspect, right? Or we talk about different, we all just take a different subject related to Oumuamua, for example. And one of the ones that I did was I wanted to talk about like the size and speed of the thing. And so basically what I ended up doing is taking a photo I had taken of the Salt Lake Valley, and then compared the size of Oumuamua to the Salt Lake skyline that I had, and just so people could get the idea of how large this thing was.
Oh, right. That's really neat.
Yeah. And then sometimes, we'll like, I some of my friends referred to me as a Photoshop ninja. And so I will do some sort of Photoshop with a lot of the images as well that we're sharing, just to kind of help paint a picture, get a point across, so that this, the people there at the Comic-Con, FanX can, I guess, wrap their head around a little bit better what we're trying to portray.
That's one of the things that I really like about Photoshop, is it allows you to do that. You can still bring out the science, but then you can highlight some of those things that you want to bring across. In terms of taking photographs, do you prefer solar, or do you prefer lunar, or do you prefer deep sky, or is it kind of balance between them?
I would say balance between them. Obviously, solar and lunar are a little bit more attainable, just because they're always there. And even with clouds, it's not a deal breaker. So some of my favorite photos actually have clouds in the picture with the sun or in the picture with the moon.
Yeah, your compositions are really outstanding. Is there something in particular that drives your your compositions? So when you're looking at it, is there something that you say, oh, well, do you relate it to experience, or because your eye, to me, looks just outstanding. How do you pick up those ideas kind of thing?
I appreciate that. So this kind of stems back a little bit to when I very first got into photography. I actually went on a couple photo trips with my father-in-law, and he was, basically just explained the basics of photography. Like, these are leading lines. When you take a picture of a stream, you don't want it to end at the bottom of the photo. You want it to end in a corner, because that shows that it leads somewhere. And the big thing about photography is each photo should tell a story, and the idea at the end of the day is, do I feel something when I look at this photo? Is there a reason I can't stop looking at this photo? What about this photo is so intriguing? What about this photo caught my attention? And it's figuring those things out that's probably influenced me more than anything. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it's a photography challenge called 365. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have.
Okay, perfect. I'll just do a quick recap for any of the listeners who don't know. So 365 is a photo competition, or it's a competition essentially with yourself, where every single day you take one photo. It doesn't have to be a great photo. It doesn't have to be basically the idea behind it is get out, use your camera, start becoming more familiar with it. So I did the challenge once, and I just did it to do it. I wasn't very happy with it, and so I did it for a second year. And what's interesting is if you actually look at the second year and you go through the photos, you can actually start to see that progression happen. Also, because of social media, you quickly find out what people find interesting and what people don't find interesting. Something that might be really passionate to you, or some sort of Easter egg in your life, people might not care about. And I mention that more. It's not necessarily to always cater to the crowd, right? Because the point of being an artist is to do it for yourself. But I feel like there is something to be said about what the group does recognize and does appreciate. When you do a challenge like 365, you learn pretty quickly about what people are looking for, what people appreciate, and in a way, it does actually help influence how you take photographs.
Yeah, that's some fantastic advice, and I know Gene's really into when people beginnings taking astrophotography and photography in general, that using that equipment, on a daily basis and one step at a time. And I really love that the concept of telling a story. Never really thought of it that way, but you're right. When I'm looking at your photography, it definitely tells a story, and it certainly touches me.
Thanks. Yeah, I will say this. One of the things I want to do is I want to actually tell a story in a different way, where it's basically just me, and it's at the computer, and I have a few ideas on how to make it look like it, but to where it makes it look like I've been there for hours on end, and it titled editing one picture, because anyone that's done any sort of deep space astrophotography knows exactly how that feels. But it's awesome. It's very satisfying, as you both know. So
Richard, are you a Canon or are you a Nikon user?
Ooh, good question. I before answering that, I will say that one of my best friends, he is the opposite of me, and he offered me $300 to help with the pain of switching. And at the time, I had a couple really crappy lenses, and the idea of switching I was like, no way, I won't do it. Just because it would be such a pain, even with the $300 bonus. And then what's funny is then I actually got in too deep, where it's like, at this point, it's like, nope, I'm where I'm at. So basically again, back to my now ex-father-in-law, he had Nikon, and I thought, well, if I buy a Nikon, I have access to his lenses. If I buy a Canon, I don't. So I bought a Nikon. And now when people ask me, what should I go with, Nikon or Canon? I always say, go to Best Buy, go to Costco, see which one feels better in your hand. Because if the Canon feels off and the Nikon feels good, that's the one I would go with, So yeah, I'm a Nikon myself.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot. The reason I started was because when I was younger, my father, when I was 17, 18, my father had an old, well, it wasn't old at the time, but it was a Canon AE1 film camera, and that's what I had access to. So I used Canon. But of course, those are the old bayonet style lenses. They didn't have the EF yet. They didn't have all the new lenses. So I used that. And he had a 50 millimeter f 1.8, I think, at the time. So I used that way back, Hellbop, Hyakutake, aging myself there. But that's how I started because my father had a Canon. I'm sure if my father had a Nikon, I probably would have had a Nikon, because just as you said, it's what other people have. And it's easier to learn that way when somebody can pass on their knowledge they've learned. But if you're just starting out, like you said, it really goes back to grabbing that camera and feeling what it feels like in your hands, and what it feels like if it's too heavy or if it just feels ergonomic. But as far as imaging, it's a little different, because you're not normally hanging on to it. It's usually mounted to a tripod, or it's mounted to the back of a SCT, or it's mounted to the back of a refractor. So you really don't have much ergonomics. It's more so, and this might be a problem you've experienced, but it is more so about having a camera that's supported by different software and has the most support as far as being able to troubleshoot. And if it seems a lot of stuff nowadays, a lot of software is geared towards a Canon. Now, whether that's because they have a more open SDK and their APIs are easier than Nikon, or if it's just because that's just the way it is. But you see more cameras. I see more cameras, and this is just what I see. It's not necessarily what reflects what everybody else has at star parties, but I see more Canons than I do Nikons for actual DSLRs being used at star parties or online. So,
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. So, Canon, obviously the high when you go high end, there's the price difference between the two is blurry. On the low end, though, I personally feel like Canon is a better deal, and so and that could be part of the driving factor as well, right? I saw was it Popular Mechanics, or no? It was the magazine that used to be all about reviews. I'm drawing a blank on what it was now.
well, there's Consumer Reports, and then
Consumer Reports.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. And they came back and they said HP has the most, like out of all the laptops, that one was the one with the most reported problems. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but it also sold the most as well, right? So like if someone said like, oh, Canons have nothing but problems, it's like, right, but there's more Canons out there.
Yeah, their market share is higher, so.
Exactly. And an additional thing I'll say, are you guys familiar? Well, you guys know about how people will astromodify their cameras.
Yep.
Yes.
So do you guys know of Clarence Spencer of Spencer's Camera?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So he's a good friend of mine. He's the one who modified my camera as well. And talking to him, he mostly does Canons, but he was actually telling me that like him being able to modify cameras, Canon has a wider support for that as well. In fact, there's been a few Nikons I've said to him, like, well, what about this version? He's like, nope, I can't do that one. Like the way that it's made up, it's very difficult. He's the one who does all the astromodifications for NASA as well, like on the International Space Station, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Have you had any, now do you prefer DSLR, or have you tried mirrorless, or do you have a preference between the two of those?
Good question. So they always say the best telescope is the one that you use. The best camera is the one that you use. I've got DSLRs, and so that's usually what I'll use. I did just barely buy my very first dedicated astro camera for deep sky, and I tried to get pictures with it. And I don't know if the software is just terrible or what, but I didn't get anything. Like a whole night, nothing, and everyone knows how this feels, right? You spend all night and you got nothing to show for it. I don't know. I'm kind of kicking myself now, wishing I would have bought the Meade one that I did a video on, because I knew how to use that one. But this was such a good deal, I couldn't pass it up. But as far as my one issue with mirrorless is a couple different reasons, but one of the main one is I've seen, like, as nice as mirrorless is, one issue is because that sensor is always on, you you get that noise coming in because of that.
Okay.
And so that's something to consider. Astrophotography, I don't think it really matters though, because the sensor's on anyway, right? Like even with DSLR.
It can be. I'm actually trying a foray into using actually a Canon RA, and the noise is something that I have to deal with in dealing with it in Photoshop and PixInsight when I'm editing the photos and stacking them together. You can typically eliminate that doing deep sky stuff, but I think that, like you mentioned, it's one of those concerns that I had, is that how do I deal with some of that noise?
Mm-hmm. Just tell the consumer that it's stars. Just kidding.
So going back to before the Canon and the Nikon, I'm assuming you use a lot of Meade products since you were an ambassador. What do you currently have for a telescope and a mount?
Yeah, so I will switch between the two mounts. I actually use my Celestron mount a little more than I do my Meade. I'll keep my Meade mount as more of a like a portable option, but and part of that is when I made the pier, I made my pier for my Celestron, and it's just a bare line, the little AVX mount, and I mean it does pretty okay. I am thinking of upgrading at some point, but on that I'll switch between my 8-inch Edge HD Celestron, or I will switch. Yeah, it's basically there are 3 scopes that are on there: the 8-inch, the 115 millimeter Series 6000 Meade, which is a triplet, and then the solar scope, the 70 millimeter. So I keep all my gear inside like one of the pods or one of the bays of my observatory, and I just swap them out depending on what I want to get that day or whatever. And then sometimes when I'm doing solar, I'll have the 115 millimeter with the 70 millimeter. And then that way I can get like some really good pictures using the Herschel wedge of the photosphere, is it? Yeah. And then my wife has no idea why she bought me the Continuum filter, but I was very excited. She's like, here's that thing you wanted, I guess. Happy birthday. And it's like one item. And she's like, I feel like I didn't really do you good for your birthday. I'm like, no, this is exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, it's always nice to have a significant other that helps fuel your hobby. So you have a Celestron, it's an AVX. What was your choice? Why did you choose a Celestron AVX and not like a Skywatcher or an Orion or an Ioptron? Why did you decide to go with a Celestron?
That's a good question. So it stems back to when I first started deep sky photography, like when I very first started. I was watching, I'm not sure of how many of the listeners are familiar with Forrest Tanaka on YouTube, but he has some very, very, very informational videos, and they give a really good overview on how to get started at a budget level. And the mount he was using was the Celestron AVX. And that's actually the one that I'm like, well, I might as well buy this, and it was pretty good. So, and what's funny is I can now sell the thing used for like more than I bought it for. And that was, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. So
yeah, the situation definitely will work out in your favor. This whole entire situation going on with supply chains and issues of people trying to get a hold of products. What do you use right now for processing? Before you like to use Photoshop, you said, is that all you use, or do you use PixInsight? Do you use Deep Sky Stacker? Do you use Meade software?
Yeah, so it depends on what I'm imaging, but if I do anything like lunar, well, that depends too. Some photos I will use my DSLR on of the moon or deep sky. But for solar and like lunar or any planetary body, I'll use the Meade LPI-G cameras, the advanced ones. I do have the basic one as well, but I mean, if you've got the advanced, you might as well use them. So that's what I use for all of my planetary. That includes the sun and the moon, just because, yeah. And for that, I use the Meade software, Sky Capture, which is, I really enjoy it. I really like that software. I've gotten used to it. Again, this is why I'm kicking myself for buying this other dedicated Astro camera, because the software, I haven't figured it out yet. With processing, I've tried a bunch of different stuff out there, and some of it I just don't understand. So as far as stacking goes, with the videos that I do of planetary stuff, I'll use Auto Stacker too. And then from there, I bring it into Lightroom and Photoshop, and then that's where I finish my processing. Whenever I do deep sky stuff, mostly just DSLR, since that's where I have most of my experience so far, I'll do Deep Sky Stacker to stack everything. And then from there, I take the TIFF file that it creates, and then I bring it in, and I don't even touch it in Deep Sky Stacker or anything. And then I'll bring it into Photoshop and Lightroom and finish it up there. I did just barely download PixInsight to try it out. I have no clue what to do, because it's like just pew over my head. But, just like everything, once you get used to it, I'm sure it'll be this amazing tool, So
it's interesting that I always talk to Dennis and tell him that I use, like for Milky Way shots and from wide field, I actually use Lightroom more than I use PixInsight or more than I'll use Photoshop. And Lightroom is just because, going back to being a photographer and having the Lightroom, you can easily do a preset, or you can actually go through really quickly and adjust your histogram, and you can get something really close and really, really fantastic. And then you can take it into Photoshop. I find that Lightroom is kind of an underused software, because a lot of people, they just strictly hear everybody using Photoshop. They strictly hear people using DSS, or they strictly hear people using PixInsight, and that's what they immediately use. But going back to being a photographer and having my father's AE1 back when I was 17, 18 years old, and then one of the first programs you learn is Lightroom to do your photography, whether you're doing weddings or whether you're doing portraits. I just think it's a very underutilized software that's very powerful, and I tend to use it more for Milky Ways than I will Photoshop or any other software, Astro Pixel Processor or Serial, any of those. I tend to use Lightroom more for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, it like Lightroom has really come a long way from where it first started out. There's so many tools that I just love with Lightroom. One thing I feel too is, like, sometimes I'll only like barely use one of the tools, and I like, whenever I do my photos, I want it to pop without you realizing why it pops. I want the photo to become like where you can't turn away, like you have to keep looking at it for some reason, but you don't know why. And a lot of that comes from just doing very subtle changes, small little things that just enhance details that you normally, wouldn't see otherwise.
So here's a question that's probably going to stump you and make you put on your thinking cap. But what advice would you give to someone just starting out on their imaging journey? Is there something that specifically sets out in your mind that you would like absolutely positively 100% just say, as a beginning imager, this is what you got to do?
Let's see. What would I give as I would say get out, take photos. It's dark and rainy, get out, take photos. It's super clear, get out, take photos. I only live in the city, get out, take photos. Like that would probably be the biggest thing is just there's so many times where, oh, well, I live in the city. That's great, but like you can still get great pictures of any sort of planetary body living in the city, and by staying inside binge watching Netflix, you're not going to get any better with photography. I don't know. That would probably be my biggest thing. And also just remember, taking a photo is only half the journey. Processing it is the other one, the other part. If you can't process an image correctly, you can take the best image in the world, but it won't matter because it's not going to have that extra factor. You know what I mean?
So Richard, living in rural, do you use any light pollution filters, or do you?
I do. Yeah, and that's a good question. I always forget what this light filter is called. And here's the thing, Gene. I don't use it because I have to. I use it just to help. And I mean, it does help a little bit, obviously, just because, and I'm sure everyone is feeling this pain for the most part, is just houses are popping up everywhere. Like when I first moved in, there was probably like maybe a handful of houses just south of me and then pretty much nothing for miles. And now there's, oh gosh, a bunch. Luckily, the city is putting in some, night sky friendly lighting. So that does help. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name of the filter. It's
just a regular light pollution, like a clip-in, or use the actual 2-inch, or what do you?
So for what I have, I use the it's not a focal reducer. I mean, well, I guess it is a focal reducer, but it's kind of like a focal reducer, but then you can screw it on. It's the Orion one actually, and I just use the regular 2-inch. The problem with clip-ins is there's only a couple of clip-ins for Nikons out there, and they're like way over, like expensive. The Canon clip-ins are a lot more affordable, and there's a lot more of them. So yeah, this is just a 2-inch, and it lets the band pass through for both red and green, red, green, and blue and stuff. So it's one of those multi-pass band filters. Like I said, I'm drawing a blank on which.
A little bit of narrow band then.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, the first time I ever used one, it was, I had a little 1.25 inch, and I was taking a picture of the Dumbbell Nebula, and I was so shocked to see the contrast. And ever since then, I ended up buying the 2-inch counterpart. Ever since then, it's just been my favorite. So I got it. It's the UHCS Nebula 2-inch. Took me a minute. I was searching online before I finally found it. Anyway, yeah. And it's the beta version.
Knowing what you know now, you've had 12 years, a lot more, however many years into your imaging. What would you do differently as a beginner? Is there anything that you would do differently that you would suggest to somebody just starting out?
I don't know. I'm the type of person that wants to try and like experience a lot of different things before I figure out which one I want to, like what I want to go into. So like, if someone was like, I want to get into photography, then I would say, great, take pictures of everything that you can possibly think of. Now, if somebody came up and said, what about astrophotography specifically? That gets a little more tricky, and again, it's kind of work with what you've got. So I will have regular photographers come up and ask me that question, and I more or less pass on to them the same thing that I did, is get yourself a little sky tracker. It's a great way to kind of blend regular photography with astrophotography without really spending a whole lot. I bought one of the first iOptron sky trackers. It was like $300. Since then, they're practically like fully fledged mounts at this point, that the things that they offer. But it was one of their first versions, and the thing still works amazing. Like it's got like a couple pound payload. It handles my big telephoto lens without a problem. I've even taken pictures with my little 80 millimeter on that thing, and there's no counterweight, nothing. It actually does really good. So my main thing is, find ways that you can get into this without breaking the bank. Like right now on Kickstarter, there's like a little, it's called the Dwarf 2 telescope camera thingy. I'm not even sure. I was looking at it earlier today, and the thing's $350 US, and the stuff that's coming out of this is what I was using, like I had all of my equipment. I was probably in, I don't know, $4,000 worth of equipment to get the same stuff that this was getting, and that's the thing. Technology is just constantly like going up. Like it's crazy the amount of the clarity and great pictures that we can take now versus 20 years ago. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're doing, it's not NASA quality, obviously, but I laugh when a friend shared my photo, and he goes, "Yeah, my photos aren't really anything compared to my friend." And this guy he was talking to said, "Is your friend a satellite?" Because just these photos to the average Joe just they're interstellar. They're amazing. They're something that you never see every day. And
so the other thing we can get to and talk a little bit about is that you decided and you went ahead and bought a observatory that you house all your equipment in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I prior to buying this, Gene, my brother-in-law, he lives about 10 minutes south, and he's in a much more rural area than I am. And he's got a friend that was selling a silo, and he's like, "Hey, are you interested in the silo?" I'm like, "Of course I am, because I can convert it into an observatory." So it was like $100, so I thought, of course. And then what's funny is I started doing the math and the time it would take. And eventually I went, it's actually cheaper if I just buy like a Nextdome or a SkyPod. So I talked to my wife, and that's the thing. Ever since we've been married, she's like, she knows that that's been like on my wish list. And the older you get, the more you're like, I really want this photo, but do I really want to spend like an hour lugging like 300 pounds worth of equipment out to only turn around at 6 a.m. and pull it back in? And anyway, it allows that hobby to, I guess, more or less, I feel like, kind of become its own, right? So yeah, I've got the Nextdome. Came in a box. I was so shocked when it showed up, just because I'm like, oh, it's like in a box on a pallet. Okay. My kids had fun trying to climb all over the thing when I was trying to put it together. That was, like I said, my youngest is autistic. He's special. He's pretty far on the spectrum too. So, but yeah, I mean, it's been awesome. It's so nice being able to go out during the daylight hours, get everything set up for my shot that I'm doing later on that night. And since I am like in the Rocky Mountains, I can just point the telescope at the mountain, and I can more or less get focus, so that later that night, like with my guide scope or whatever, I'm not struggling for hours trying to find the sweet spot, focus like on a big old star. So it's definitely helped making astronomy and astrophotography more practical. So, and that's what I love about practical astrophotography is I'm all about practical. If it's not practical, it's like I can only do it for so long before I have to, I don't know, find a better way. So
that's funny you say that, because that's probably one of the reasons why I named it practical, was because there's so many different names you could choose. But a lot of us, you've got photography, maybe you're a woodworker, maybe you like to play sports, maybe you have other hobbies, and it's all depends on which hobby takes the reins and kind of takes the spotlight. So if it's not practical, you're really not going to do it. So if it's something that takes way too much time and too much effort, you're not going to do it. So that's kind of why we decided to name the magazine Practical. So what was your main idea or your main reason behind going with the Nextdome and not, like you said, the other options?
Okay, good question. So we're talking practical. What's more practical than price? Now, obviously the Sky Dome, or is it Sky Shed Pod?
Yeah, Sky Shed.
And I mean that one's pretty affordable too. The one thing that I didn't care for on that as much was part of the zenith. You miss that a little bit, but also like I love the look of the dome. There's something about having an actual observatory that looks like an observatory. Like I mean, the shed that has the roll-off roof, that's great. What's nice about that is you can set up like several scopes, right? You don't have to worry about any sort of automated dome or any of that, but you're kind of missing out on that look. I don't know. And I know that sounds a little ridiculous, because it's like, it's all about what it can do, and I'm talking about practical stuff, right? But that was one of the things. I really wanted something, not just that, but the other choice to go with a dome in general is I do live in the Rocky Mountains, where we do get a fair amount of snow. And so I wanted something that could handle that. Now that I think about it, I think the Sky Shed Pod might handle the weight of the snow just a little bit better, just because I think they have a little bit more of the rollerblade wheels in there. Plus, it's also made of the same stuff that my kids' toys are made out of, and those seem to hold up pretty decent. But No, I like the price. Of course, I bought it before shipping prices went through the roof. Nextdome has been awesome. Every sort of interaction that I've had with them has been nothing but great. I need to reach out to them one more time because to try and save a couple dollars, once again, I ended up buying like an older version of the Dome controller, and I cannot find the drivers to save my life. So I'm hoping that if I reach out to them, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we've got it on some old floppy disks somewhere that we can, copy over to like an email to send you."
Having the Nextdome now, you save yourself 30, 40, 50 minutes setup time, lugging time. Does that actually give you more time to image? Do you find yourself imaging more than you did before? Or do you find yourself setting it and forgetting it and then just walking away and having a drink or going out and doing other things?
I probably image more than I would normally, obviously. So when I very first started out, I only had one kid. Now I have three, the youngest of which his disabilities. Which actually those aren't too bad when it comes to a lot of different things. But one thing that he had a major hard time with, and and anyone who followed me might have noticed, like, Richard, you don't post as many astro photos as you used to. And it's like, well, yeah, when your kid doesn't let you sleep for 5 years, it finally starts to wear on you a little bit. So like it was about 5 years. Like I always used to be afraid of death. Like I was like, oh, I never want to die, never want to die. And to be fair, I still feel this way. However, I'm not as afraid anymore because after only recently, like within like the last couple months, has he actually started to like sleep throughout the night without waking up. I mean, he still wakes up at like between 4 and 6 every morning, but at least he sleeps that long. He would wake up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, run around, scream, turn on all the lights, like push over bookcases. I mean, it was terrible. That definitely affected my imaging more than anything. But having the Nextdome set up, drastically increases the amount. It's just because it's ready. It's there, and there's little to no setup time. I mean, I have everything set up with. I can't even describe it. It's just, you turn on the mount and it's like, hey, just do the last alignment. And then, I mean, more or less everything's like set up perfectly. You might have to adjust things a little bit, but I mean, just that alone is totally worth it. So, and then it's on a little cement pad out back that was already there. And I've just got some solar panels and everything's off the grid. So yeah, it just makes everything way easier. So
that's nice. So what do you said it's off the grid. What are you using are you using like a Jackery, or are you using like deep cycle batteries? What are you using as far as to power it?
Yeah. So, Jackery, I actually don't have a Jackery. I do have a Rock Pals, but, what I ended up doing is this is back before Jackery even existed. I started to look into solar generators, and I was looking at the price of like Goal Zero and some of these other ones, Blue Eddy or whatever. And the prices were just way more than I was ever expecting or anything. And growing up, we were all told, oh, the end of the world's going to happen Y2K, which it didn't. And then, oh, the Mayan calendar, and so I always have had that sort of, emergency preparedness mindset. And so I actually ended up building a solar generator years before I would ever use it, just in the case of, some sort of post-apocalyptic scenario happening or some blackout or whatever. And, as time went on, lithium batteries started to become more affordable and more available. And I ended up building myself like nicer and better ones and more portable. Lithium does have a little bit of a problem with heat and cold that lead acid doesn't, even though lithium has like way more cycles. But I ended up just sticking my lead acid batteries and like solar generator that I built like forever ago in there. And it powers it no problem. I don't even come close to depleting the batteries at all, which only increases their cycle life better. And so, I honestly imagine it'll probably be 5 years before I have to swap out the batteries in that thing, just because they're not cycled as often. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. But if I did have a Jackery or like a Blue Eddy or Rock Pals, I'd probably bring it in after every time. So that's just one more thing I have to bring in. It's like, because I usually won't leave my computer out there unless it's relatively decent weather. And so I'm always lugging that thing back and forth, which I say lugging like it's a bad thing. It's a laptop. And I actually have a plug out there, so I don't have to, transfer that back and forth. But yeah, I mean, that's how I power it. So
that's the way to go. I mean, I've seen people that take lithium ion, lithium polymer kind of more for hobbyists for like model airplanes, that kind of stuff. But now they have the lithium iron that are better off for your extreme colds. They don't lose any kind of the charge. But that's the way to go now, is a lot of people with lugging stuff in and having to worry about setup times. And then a lot of people get frustrated from setting up, and if you don't set up perfectly right, you don't get your polar alignment perfectly right. It just injects a lot of different issues with your setup. So that's the ultimate goal, is to have a dedicated, whether it's a shed or an observatory or someplace to keep your equipment. It also keeps it clean and out of the way from kids tripping over it and wives tripping over it and that kind of stuff. With everything you have right now, are you planning any big purchases, or are you basically set in what you have for equipment? Or you said you just got a new dedicated astro camera. So other than that, is there anything else that you really like wish you had, or something that money's no object? Is there something you wish you really had to complete your setup?
Oh yeah. Yes, absolutely. So one thing that my 70 millimeter is amazing at getting the full disk of the sun. Every time that I even attempt to add any sort of a Barlow or try to stretch, the image as much as I can to get details, it's just horrendous. It's not even worth it. That's another thing. So many people are like, "Oh, I need to crop this image." No, you don't. Don't crop the image, because the more you crop the image, the less clear your subject is. I mean, generally speaking. But as far as my wish list goes, one of the biggest things I want to get my hands on the Daystar. I'm keeping my eyes on I want to get one of those really bad. I recently just barely got it. It was given to me by an old coworker. She just randomly messaged me, "Hey, where do telescopes go to die?" Anyway, turns out she was getting rid of a 12-inch Meade LX200. It's the original. It was pre-GPS days, so it's like 30 years old. But I'm like, you give it to me, and the hand controller, one of the diodes burn up in it, and anyway, I'm not sure of how useful the hand controller was anyway, and so right now I'm trying to get it hooked up to my computer so I can control it that way. If I can't, then I want to get I think it's the EQ6 Pro. It's the EQ6R Pro, I guess. But that's like, I guess, the most basic entry level affordable mount that can. I mean, obviously, I would go with a Paramount or something if I had the money. But that's probably the one that I would go with. Just for that telescope. I was able to set it up, and it does slew when it's on and everything. So I was able to actually use it a little bit. And I mean, wow, the optics are just phenomenal on that thing. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I would buy any more telescopes. Like, I'm actually quite happy with the telescopes that I have. And I know that might be blasphemy to some people, but again, it all comes to practical. I mean, how if I can't fit it within a certain amount of square footage in my house or in my observatory, it's outside of that practical bubble. But those two things, and then I'm not gonna lie, the new Attic 60 megapixel camera, dude, that thing looks sweet. That thing looks like a dream.
Yeah, the issue comes though is as they get more cameras, and this is what they're all doing, is Canon, Nikon, and Sony. They're all doing the megapixel battle. But as you get more megapixels, it takes a bigger, heftier processor, more RAM, more hard drive space to be able to actually take those images and do anything with them. So you're talking, I mean, I just built a new computer that's a Ryzen 5950 with 128 gigs of RAM and a 12 gig GPU. And you're talking with these new cameras, even those are bogged down because the 60 megapixel, and you're starting to stack 10, 15, 20, 25 or more images. You're really starting to talk about some heavy duty hardware you need to be able to do anything with those images. So it's going to be interesting to see in the future what they're going to do, because they can keep having the megapixel battles, as I say. They keep going from 60 megapixels, and Canon and Nikon go back and forth with their mirrorless and their DSLRs with more pixels and more features. But the Intel, AMD, I mean, they're going to have to keep up with them, because a lot of people nowadays know with PixInsight that in order to run PixInsight, you got to have a pretty hefty duty computer. And if you don't, then you're waiting 10, 15 minutes to run a process, and then you forgot what you're doing and you forgot what you're trying to accomplish. And next thing you know, you're like, all right, I'm done. You're packing your bags and you're going back to sports or going back to something else.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. Sorry. It's fine, because I did have to upgrade my computer at one point when I upgraded my camera. But since then, I haven't had to, because I usually just, I'm like, it's been 10 years. I should upgrade my computer. And it's funny, because right before you said what your stats were on your computer, I thought, I don't know, my computer's okay. I'm sure it could handle it. And then you're saying what yours is. I'm like, that's like way better than mine. And if his is having a hard time, I definitely will have a hard time. So that's true. That's definitely something to think about. So,
well, those are just ancillary peripherals that you got to think about when you're, not only do you need like the mount and the camera and the filters, but then once you get that data, you got to have bigger hard drives nowadays. So you got to have like a 4 terabyte or bigger hard drive. And then you got to have fast hard drives. So you want to have like an NVMe or something that's got fast write times. So you're talking more money, and then you're talking processor power and GPU power to be able to view those. It can get out of hand pretty quick. But I mean, at the end of the day, I guess it all depends on what you can afford, how far you want to go with it, and if you're happy. I mean, a lot of people, I know Dennis, you like to just do the acquisition part of it and not so much the processing. And there's other people that like to do more processing, so they'll download images or data off the internet and work on it, and they don't really deal with much of the actual acquisition. So
very, very true. I do like to take the photographs, and I like to play with them a little bit, but the hours spent processing, I typically run out of time to do. I'm not sure why, but I've got data to play with, so I'll have to learn how to play with it a little bit better, especially now after seeing your photography too. So,
along with that, Dennis, if you ever have questions, I'm literally an open book. You can, shoot me a message on Instagram. I think you have my contact information too. But yeah, and this goes to any listener as well. I'm literally an open book. Whatever I can do to help, I'm all for. So
wow, that's fantastic. Thank you.
And that's one of the things that make this hobby great. I don't have to say it. I think everybody knows it, but that's a lot of people online and in groups and astronomy clubs and just your neighbors and stuff. They learn what you're doing. And a lot of people in this industry or in this hobby, manufacturers, camera manufacturers, everybody just likes to talk shop. And I mean, end of the day, a lot of them, you can give them a phone call and talk to them for not hours on end, but they'll be happy to answer questions for you. And it's a really good hobby to be in. And even though it can eat up some of your pocketbook, it's a lot of fun when you get down to it. Now there can be frustrations and a lot of stuff where you want to throw your telescope through the glass, or you want to take your mount and throw it in the garbage. But end of the day, I mean, I think there's a lot of reward, and just seeing other people's images are an inspiration to keep on going and want to improve yourself. So I guess with that, we'll kind of wrap this up. If listeners want to follow you, Richard, Instagram, Facebook, what are your different profile usernames and handles?
Yeah, so Instagram's probably the best way. I put a lot of effort and energy into my Facebook one, and then Facebook decided to change the algorithms. Basically, if you want, people to see your stuff, pay us, or we'll, silence you. That's what it felt like anyway. Instagram's a little bit better in that respect. And so my handle is just Keele Photography, no space, no underscore. just Keele, and then the word photography. That's probably the best way. I mean, you can find me on Facebook too, which is also, I think that is just Keele Photography as well. So it's both Facebook and Instagram. It's just /Keele Photography, no space, no underscore, nothing.
All right, that's I think going to end it for us for this episode. So I want to thank you again, Richard, for taking the time out of your day and joining us for a chat. And I think we'll probably have you on again in the future, and hopefully we'll get to see you, whether you're there for Meade or Orion or not. Hopefully we might be able to see you at next year's NEAF conference forum.
Okay. Yeah. That would be awesome. I will. Yeah, definitely on my, you know what? I'm going to add that to my wish list as well. And I'll just say, I need to revise my wish list after talking to you about like processing. So cool.
All right. Well, thank you, Richard. It's been great.
Yeah. It's been great talking to you guys as well.
You just heard the Practical Astrophotography Podcast. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to be notified for upcoming episodes. Visit us at practicalastrophotography.com/podcast. Until next time, here's wishing you clear skies.
Oh, yeah.